Hey guys, Jacob here from the Cloud Crew, and today we're going to be building a dual coil around a 0.2 ohm resistance. Now, a few things that we're going to need: a pack of precision screwdrivers. If you don't already have a pack of these, pick a pack, pick 2 packs up. They come in really handy when you're building your coils, if you're using to wrap the coil on, or if you're using something like the accumulator, you can actually use these in place of that to keep them steady while you're tightening your leads and doing some cleaning with them. We're also going to need a good pair of wire snips, good pair of pliers. I've got a pair of tweezers here that's got a flattened edge on them. They come in really handy for when you need to clean up the coils, tighten them up. And if you don't have one, pick up an ohm checker. You need one of these guys. Safety first, don't be stupid. We're going to be building it today on the Pots Box Dual 18650 and a slightly modified Mutation XL V1. I've changed the screws, I put the chuck on top of it, and we're going to be wicking today with the Cotton Bacon 2.0, of course. Now, I've got a couple of batteries here that are fully charged, and I've got a couple already in here. These are VTC5s, these are NREMs. Make sure you're using high-amp batteries. Safety first, guys. Now, the ones that are in here right now are slightly drained. It's kind of a pro tip to give you guys when you're actually firing and doing the cleaning. Try not to use fully charged batteries, something a little bit weaker. It won't be as an extreme when you're firing it up, and it'll give you more time to clean up, make sure you're not popping any legs off, or if you do have a hot spot in there. So let's bring the cameras in close, we'll zoom in, we'll get these guys put together. Alright, so we've got everything zoomed in, we're ready to get started here. Now the first one I'm going to use the accumulator on. That way you can see how to use that tool if you've got one, or if you're interested in picking one up. On the second one, I'm going to use the precision screwdriver so you can see how to manually wrap it yourself. Now the diameter that I like to use is 3mm. I think it gives you more room for the lower resistances, so you get more juice, more cotton, and you get a better vape out of it. So I've already got the 3mm lined up in here. You can see CW30. We're going to be using 22 gauge, like I said earlier, so we're going to need a 6 full wrap or a 7/6. And I'll show you what that means once we get this first one built here. So we're going to slide them in here. Now I know this is probably more wire than we need for this build, but I like to make sure I've got a little excess. That way, if I do need to move anything or change anything, I've got plenty of leg to work with here. So we'll slide it in. I'll use my thumb to hold down there, and I'll take it and bend it right up against the base. And do kind of a half wrap so we get it started. Take the tip of our accumulator, slide her in. Now if we start it off kind of backwards where the screw is opposite the leg, we can count it just 1. And I'll use my finger to hold it. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Finish off that rotation there. And using my nail, I'll grab underneath the coil, slide it out of there, put it right back on there, use my other fingernail, and actually push it down and straighten that leg out. And grab both of them, give them a little twist to make sure they're nice and tight. And we've got a nice little coil right there, nice and easy with the accumulator. Gives you a nice, clean, even coil. Now the 7/6 that I mentioned earlier, where if you're looking at, let's say the top here, if you counted each wrap that we see on top, it should be 7. And if you flip it over to where you're looking at the bottom of it or the other side of it, you should see 6. That's where the 7/6 comes from. Now full wraps, like I said, I did 6 full wraps, or it comes out to be a 7/6. So we're going to put that off to the side. And we're going to use my 3mm precision screwdriver to do the other coil. So now I'll come over the top. That way I know I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4. That way the top should count 7 and the bottom should count 6. So again, I'll give myself plenty of leg. I like to kind of have the base of the screwdriver pushed up against my hand, holding the kanthal itself underneath it. That way, once I do get it started, I've got a nice leverage and a nice pull on it. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, as you can see, not bad. The accumulator will give you a much cleaner coil unless you're very well practiced at this. But again, like I said, not bad. I'm going to pull, same idea, tighten it up, make sure there's no gaps, make sure it's as clean as possible. There you go. Not quite as good as the accumulator, but pretty good there. So now we've got both our coils, both on a 7/6 or 6 full wraps. We're going to go ahead and put it into our mutation. Now, safety first again, like I said, we're going to take the batteries out. That way, while I'm moving, we don't accidentally fire this button and end up burning ourselves. Get that on there. I'm going to loosen up these screws. Make sure we've got plenty of room to get in there. Now this is where I was talking about earlier, where if you have one pack of precision screwdrivers, maybe 2 will be helpful, because I've got 2 here that are 3mm. So if I use the accumulator to wrap them on, I can actually use these to steady the coils in there while I'm tightening everything down so they don't get shifted. So we're going to do our first one here, just putting it on to the screwdriver. Making sure our legs are nice and straight. Again, like I said, these legs are extra long. I'm a better safe than sorry kind of guy here. So then what we're going to do is get one leg through there, and one leg through the other. And now that we've got the one in there, we don't want to tighten down the positive post yet because we've got the other coil to put in there, but we can go ahead and tighten down that negative. Now on this build, I'm not going to do any kind of centering. It's actually a style I've been working with lately, just using them off to the side and in a different way that I like to wick that. So that's what I'm going to show you. So let's go ahead and tighten this guy down. Now when you're tightening these down, be careful not to over tighten them. Depending on your screws, or if you're using grub nuts or anything like that, you can over tighten and end up actually snapping off your leg right there. And that's no fun. That's not going to be good because then you're starting over. And what I'll do is take the leg, bend it out of the way, take the positive, and bend it off to the same side. Now I'm doing that to make sure that through the center post where that hole is, one leg's going to be on one side, then when I do the other side, I'm going to bend the legs the other way, so that hopefully when I screw everything down, they're sitting right next to each other. I don't want to have them crisscross for looping or anything, because then the connection's not going to be as stable. So I want to try to get them parallel to each other, that way when the screw comes down, it's holding them both evenly. So now we're going to take our other 3mm, slide them on there. We can go ahead and take this out for now. We want to go ahead, get that one through there, get our other negative through there. Again, kind of place it where you want it. And using the thumb, just gently hold it in place. And again, not screwing down the positive yet, we're just going to do the negative. So we want to get them lined up before we go tightening down that positive. Not secure, and then just like I did to the other one, just on the opposite side. We're going to bend that one off there, and we're going to bend that one off there. Hopefully those two in the middle are right next to each other. And what I'll do is, you can already see how that one's kind of wiggled. If we went ahead and tightened everything down now, it would be a disaster. So we're going to get under it. Straighten him back out, make sure that they're basically where we want them to be, equal distances, equal separations, and then using my forefinger and thumb, just kind of holding them both level. Trying to get the screwdriver in there, and screw it down. Again, don't over tighten them, you don't want to pop your leg off. Once you've gotten that tightened down, you can give it a little wiggle there. You shouldn't see the coil wiggling too much. You shouldn't see the leg on the opposite side moving the coil. That way you know they're both nice and tight. We'll straighten her off. Same thing on the other side. Straighten it out a little bit. Now we're ready to get rid of all these little crazy legs that are laying all over the place. Oh, you see that? I can feel the coil wiggling in there. So before we do that, it's a good idea. Make sure there's no wiggle. So let's go ahead and make sure everything's nice and tight before we go cutting. Positive is a little loose, so we're going to go ahead and put our 3s back in there. So make sure we keep that coil integrity tight. Make sure they're tight. Probably had them kind of looped over each other in there in that center pin. Now we're getting nice and parallel. Still seeing a little bit of wiggle in there. A little extra tightening. If you need to, kind of back it up, kind of go back and forth with it gently. And that'll help, you know, if they are kind of sitting on each other, or if the actual kanthal might be up on the sides of the screws, you can back it up and make sure it falls down and gets nice and tight there. Again, it's all about safety. If you've got shorts, looseness, or anything wiggling around, it can cause a short. And since this is all unregulated, there's nothing to protect you. So take the time, make sure everything is secure before you start firing it and trying to vape on it. So now we've got a crazy jumble of wires here. We can go ahead and snip everything off. Go ahead and start with the negatives. Another good tip. Never cut towards yourself because they will hop off of there. Another good thing about the long legs, I can just kind of grab them and drop them. Now these positives can be kind of a pain. Another good reason to keep them nice and off to the side. That way when you're looking down at them, you can clearly see which one's going there, which one's just the excess leg. And they're far enough separated to where you can easily snip those off. I'm going to try to get it as close to the base as possible. Snippy, snippy. There you go. Now, before we fire it, we're going to check it. We're going to check that ohm, see where our resistance is at. So right now we're sitting right at 0.2. It's exactly where I wanted to be. Now that might change once I fire it and clean it up. So let's find out. Again, like I said, using the half-drain battery sometime right before you're going to charge it. That way there's not as much power getting shot to that coil. So if there's a hot spot in here, I've got 3.5, 3.6 volts going to it rather than 4.2, and inadvertently burning out the edge of the hot spot. Again, making sure safety first, positive always up. Let's get it up. You want to kind of pulse it. Don't just hammer down on that button, because if there is a hot spot, everything's gonna get capped there and you're gonna burn it out. So I'm pulsing it, let it slowly heat up. Now you can see how some of the outside legs are firing, but the inside's not. So we're gonna take my handy dandy tweezers. Nice little pinch. Now you want to pinch lightly. Again, don't just clamp down on these things, because then you'll have overlapping wires jumping over the other, and you're basically going to have to start over. Finesse. It's all about finesse. I'm going to do a little bit longer pulses. Should see it heating up from the middle there until the entire coil is lighting up. Looks pretty good. Now that we've got it firing evenly, we want to check the resistance again. It may have dropped, it may have gone up. Everything looks good, but again, safety first. Better safe than sorry, guys. Let's see. Yep, it actually went up to a 0.28, but we're going to let this cool off for a second and come back and make sure that it's jumping around there. The heat will change the resistance, so let's let it cool off for a minute, and then we'll come back to it and see what it's reading at once it's all cooled off. Alright, so now we've let it cool off. I've made sure all my leads are nice and tight, everything looks good, and we're sitting now at a 0.24, which is right around where it should be for this kind of build. So we can go ahead, let's put it back on our pots box. Let's give it a couple more fires. Let's make sure everything's still firing evenly in here. Still all looking pretty good. Now we want to make sure our coils are decently level, everything's even, because with a dual coil, they're basically, you want them to be identical. That way that when the current goes through it, they're hitting the legs at the same time, they're hitting the coils at the same time, and everything is equal. That way you don't have one coil that's firing and then the other one has to catch up, or vice versa. So we want to go ahead, and I can see this guy here is kind of bent in a little bit. So we're going to take, the Phillips always seems to work better. I'm going to slide him in there nice and gently, line everything up. Now I'm using the posts on top here, making sure they're all lined up, and I'm looking directly down the center at the coils. I'll do little corrections, Actually looks pretty good right there. Let's give it a fire. Very nice. Both lighting up, everything looks good. They both look nice and even. So now we're going to go ahead and get into the wicking. So all this out of the way here. What I'm going to use for that is the little tiny screwdriver, and of course cotton bacon. Now, being a 3mm, you want a decent size cotton bacon in there. Basically peel off something that looks just slightly larger once compressed than the coil you're putting in there. You don't want it to be too tight or you're going to get that cotton burnt taste all the time. But you don't want it to be too loose, because then once the cotton starts to wear out, which will happen really quickly when it's too loose, you won't get any flavor. It'll always taste burnt, but it won't actually utilize the juice that's in there. So something about this size seems to work well for me. And then we'll just evenly pull down it. So we've got a nice little strip there. Kind of fluffed once we peel it out, so I'll kind of go through and give it a quick roll just to make sure I don't have any, plump spots there that are going to get in my way later on. Everything feels pretty good. So next we're going to do is actually I'm going to go and get some scissors that I forgot. Alright, so we're back. Went ahead and got some scissors. I went ahead and switched batteries. Now we're going to use the fully powered one, since we're going to actually start firing it and using it. So what we're going to do Because we've got our cotton bacon here, we're going to cut this guy right down the middle. So we've got two basically even pieces. And what we're going to do is actually just pinch one side of this nice and tight. We're kind of making a needle point out of it. That way we can get it through the coil easily, but we still want this end to be nice and fluffy. So, we'll go ahead. A little bit more. Feed this guy through. As we pull it through, kind of hold one end, kind of twist it through there. And then once I've got it in, kind of twist the whole thing. I don't want it to be twisted while it's in there because it's going to be too tight. So I want to make sure we got a little bit of movement in there. It's not too tight. It's got some fluff in there, but you don't want it to be too loose. So now we've got this side done. We're going to cut off a little bit on this end because we don't need that much. And then on the side where the coil is, I'm going to cut it just about to the coil itself. I want it to have a little bit of fluff, but I don't need another tail hanging out there for this type of wicking. So I'm going to take it, do it just like that. That way we do have some juice that can hang out on this side. We want the majority of the juice to be in the little bunny tail down here. So we're going to take our little screwdriver, kind of get under it, and almost like we're folding it in half, but bending it under. And tucking it down. So we want it to be curved. We don't want it to be all bunched up in there. We want it to actually have a nice, smooth movement. You want to make sure there's nothing obstructing your coil here. It'll be a lot easier to maneuver all this once we actually get some juice in it. So we're going to do the same thing to the other side. And we're ready to throw some juice in it. Okay, now that we've got them both pretty much staged how we want them, I'll take the tip of the little screwdriver and kind of poke and fluff at the cotton because we want it to be fluffy. We don't want it to be really tight because then the juice isn't going to move very well. So we want it to be fluffy. Fluffy cotton moves juice. Alright, so what I've got is a little bit of DIY that I made. It's zero nicotine. I like to use the zero nicotine when we're testing these things out. That way I can sit here and, get a good 5-10 minutes just back-to-back vaping on it to make sure it's wicking properly, everything's working well, without getting a head bust. So what I'm doing is actually putting the juice basically on the center post. I want it to basically fall down to the bottom so that the cotton gets soaked from the bottom up. But I want to also make sure that I'm getting some juice right next to that coil. But I want the majority of it to kind of fall down under it. That way it's basically trying to train the cotton to move the juice in a specific direction. Now I will pretty much flood a brand new build like this so I can watch and make sure that the juice is going to move properly, it's working the way I want it to, and it's ready to be used. As you can see, the fluff here is nice and wet, but the little tail down here looks still dry. It's a little bit of juice in there, but not much. So what we're going to do is give it a couple of pulse fires. And you'll start seeing this will start getting wetter and wetter now that it's gotten some heat to it. It's actually moving the juice along. So a little bit longer, and you can tell at this point right here, you can smell your juice. If it smells like burnt cotton, there's something wrong with your wick, maybe you need to add some more juice. Keep testing it, figure out what the issue is there. You shouldn't smell burnt already. Another good tip, these fluffs over here, whether you're doing a center coil build or the side builds, if your cotton is actually hanging onto that sidewall, every time you put juice on it, the juice will run down and hit this wall and want to leak off of it. So make sure we push it in, make sure there's nothing resting on that sidewall there. All right, I think we're ready to give it a bait. Now with a side build like this, since this has got a curvature to it, I basically try to line up those center holes to be facing the center of the coil. All right, here we go. Immediate flavor. If it's too tight, you'll taste cotton. If it's too loose, you're gonna taste just burnt. It's gonna taste like it's dry. You should taste your flavor right off the bat. Sometimes, if you're doing a super low resistance, you might want to really pack that cotton in there and then just deal with the cotton taste for a little bit. But on a build like this, it's not super sub-ohm or anything. You should taste flavor right away. Good flavor, good vapor production out of it. We can take a look at it. You can see those big fluffs are starting to look kind of white. You want it to look like it's getting dry. If you're not getting the same flavor you were, but it still looks saturated, then there's, it's too tight. It's not wicking the juice, it's not working properly. So again, another reason for the 0. I can sit here, take as many puffs as I want on it, make sure that that cotton is actually wicking properly. You can see it's drying out well, it looks even, everything looks good. Well, there you go. Hopefully this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Always there to help.